If you're going to do marketing, you already have everything you need. Really, all it is having a client that likes what you're doing or that you solved a problem for that's willing to say that. There's most of the time a lot of disconnect between sales and marketing and how they view that collaboration and that partnership. I see that fail a lot. For MSPs, Facebook is great, Reddit's great, and LinkedIn. Those are fantastic places and they're really simple and it doesn't take a ton of work just to get something set up or put out there.
Welcome back to the MSP Insider Show. On this episode, we are talking with Katie Vreeland, founder of Luminary Creative. Katie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm really excited for this conversation because of really your background and the experience that you can bring to the conversation because it's so vast, but also both sides of the aisle. So before we dive into anything, why don't you tell us who you are, what you do, and why the hell that you do it?
Yeah, so I am the founder of Luminary Creative, a marketing firm based in the SaaS MSP startup tech space. We work through creating really strong, impactful go-to-markets, strong branding, messaging, everything that gets through to your end client so you can have a very repeatable process.
Yeah, the thing that I would love to unpack there as we get into the conversation, because I'm sure we will, is several of those words that you mentioned, I think are oftentimes way overlooked when it comes to growing a business or growing a company, especially in the MSP space, because there's so much white noise out there about how to grow and what to do and how to do it. But the deep thinking work is oftentimes overlooked before you get to the doing work, right? They go
Right.
from this growth through referrals to you need to grow and sell. And it's just like you skip all of the deep work that goes into those things that you just mentioned. So excited to dive into some of those topics yet today. And so to kick it off, the first question that I had for you as I sat through just an entire bank of questions, but the one that I chose to start this with, just because I think it's going to be a great precursor for the rest of the conversation, is what is one brutal truth about MSPs who don't invest in marketing?
I don't believe so if MSPs don't invest in marketing or invest in their brand or image, they won't scale. They get kind of stuck. They might have really good luck with referrals coming in from clients. They might get lucky if they go to an event, but they need some sort of strategy or machine running in the back that can just be repeatable. That it does take time to build and to think out and to see the results in the data, but it needs to be a repeatable process. Otherwise, it just stays stagnant. You don't see that hyper growth. You don't see where trends and conversations or different avenues are actually making an impact on your sales and growth at the end of the day. You have to have something there that's putting your name out there, whether it's branding as a founder or what you do as an MSP or the niche you're in. There has to be something there to bring some sort of conversation. People aren't necessarily searching for you directly. And when there's 120,000 MSPs out there, there's plenty to find that are doing marketing. And I think people forget that.
Yeah, absolutely. It goes to kind of one of those hidden areas that you mentioned, right? The go-to-market, the marketing, the positioning, the messaging. There's all these elements that go into it. And maybe that's where we start digging a little bit deeper too, is in your work with MSPs specifically, what I found, and I think I was even recently in a conversation with Jesse Miller about this, is like getting from 0 to 1, the Peter Thiel concept. It seems like that's the place that most get derailed, is like overwhelmed with the idea of I need
Right.
to do this thing, but I don't know steps 1 through 73 to actually start. What would you say to that kind of paralyzed MSP business owner who does want to invest in marketing and growth? They're committed to it, but they have no idea where to start.
Right. I think so much of marketing, when you're coming up with plans and an idea and what's going to fit your brand, most of all, 60% of it is sitting there thinking and mapping it out and going through the problem solving and the if whens. you really have to start small just to start somewhere. Just do anything. I think
Mm-hmm.
we often on both sides get stuck with like, there's so much to do. I'm not great at it. I'm not an expert. Like, why should I take all the time I already don't have and put it into
Right.
this if I don't know what the results are going to be? But doing anything, especially with the internet we have nowadays and how SEO works and how, referrals and backlinks and people just finding little niches to get interested in, doing anything at all
Mm-hmm.
by starting to make a post, by going on Reddit and having a conversation is fantastic, simple marketing. And then I
Yeah.
think it's also just working with your community or people around you and asking questions or asking other MSPs how they do it. That may just not be in your niche.
Yeah. I want to pull on that thread a little bit further because there's a couple of trigger words that are in this whole thing. And it was for me too when I was an MSP, right? Like process is a really dirty word for most MSPs. The taking 60% of the effort into the deep thinking is
Mm-hmm.
a repulsive concept for most
Right.
MSPs. Can you think of, and this isn't to like uh, belittle the actual work that goes into it, but is there like a 3-step framework? Like what would the first 3 things that an MSP could do if they carved out 2 hours of their day today, right? Or started at 5 p.m., whatever their creative period is? Like what would the first 3 things they could do to start? Because I do agree with you, like just beginning and getting in motion and executing is the hardest part. So
Right.
what would those first 3 motions that an MSP could do to get
I
going?
tell everyone when we start working together, like go through your current client list. Who are your top clients? What are their problems? What did they come to you for? What was the reason that they found you? And what are you solving?
Mm-hmm.
Um, what is their niche or their industry? Figure out what aligns and which one do you have to spend the least amount of time on and get the biggest ROI. Those are the ones you should really be lumping together and looking at. And then you focus on that or focus on those problems that they came to you for,
Mm-hmm.
especially if you start seeing a pattern. Because right there is a problem solved that you can go out and start having conversations about. People are obviously looking for it, but it changes all the time. So really figuring out your ICP, figuring out what that problem is
Mm-hmm.
that people are finding you for. I think having conversations with your current clients too, and getting a testimonial, getting any sort of feedback from them, good, bad, anything, and make a piece
Mm-hmm.
of content around it, or just ask for a testimonial and start putting that out.
Yeah.
That
I
would
want to
be an absolutely huge one.
I want to put a hard stop on, like, hit the pause button, right? And go back and listen to those 3 things, because not one of the answers that you provided forces the person, like there's no excuse for the MSP owner out there listening to this, because each one of those 3 things are things that are current and active in their business today, right? Go to your current customer list, figure that part out. Look for profitability, figure that part out. Now, you may not have those answers, but they are in your backyard because we're talking about your customers.
Right.
What problems did they solve? Why did they make that decision to come and have your MSP be the solution, right? None of the things that you mentioned, which is why I want to emphasize it, are like inexcusable to not come up with the answer to, right?
Yeah,
And
if you're going to do marketing, you already have everything you need right there. And I think that's what's so paralyzing for people is that they feel like they need all these tools, they need, really good copy, but really all it is having a client that likes what you're doing or that you solved a problem for that's willing to say that,
yeah,
or really just looking at what you've done in the past and feeling okay about talking about it or saying that you did it.
yeah.
They're so simple.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that I noticed over the course of time working in MSPs, but with so many MSPs as peers too, is that because we're traditionally people that are cut from the cloth of like, how can I help? And we are intrinsic problem solvers, but we're also, generally speaking, like not really great at being our own cheerleader either, right?
Mhm.
So like talking about the things that we've done for other people is pretty uncomfortable. And one of the things that I didn't want the audience to gloss over either about your insight was you were talking through the importance of talking about problems, right? And one of the marketing coaches that I had in my past he drilled this into me, but it was that people, you have to talk about the problems because people won't argue about problems, but they will argue over the solution, right? It's like
Right.
a strange way that the mind is wired. And so, again, from an MSP background standpoint, we oftentimes come to the market in look at me, look at me, look at the company, look at the service, look at the people, look at the like all the stuff, but it's all the solution side, or it's all the bits and bytes side. Maybe spend a little bit of time unpacking the importance of focusing on the problems rather than the flashy stuff.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is really reframing how we think about it. Exactly how you said, we're all problem solvers. That's the background. That's what we get so excited about and why we want to build things and help people and why MSPs are started. They're just problem solvers. So if you think about it in a way of, okay, these are the problems that I can solve and I know how to solve and I'm helping people, and you post about it in that, context rather than look at what I do. Look at what we do. Look at what we're so good at. Because it's horrible. It's uncomfortable. I hate talking about myself or things that we do, but I will talk to anyone to help them solve a problem or advance or do anything they want to do. And I
Mm-hmm.
think just restructuring how I thought about it has helped a lot. And especially with my conversations with MSPs, really getting them to have the conversations about why they like doing what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much content in there because it's all passion and people get behind passion.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Like that's the infectious part of communication too, right? When you can unlock that piece. One of the unlocks that I had in my mind in that transition from tech person for the first 11 years and then into the sales and marketing pieces for the last 8 was, and I still have to do it to this day, even before this interview, I go through a quick little process to force myself into taking on the persona of just being curious
Hmm.
rather than being my normal default self, which is the problem solver.
Right.
Otherwise, like I don't create enough space in the conversation to have one because I'm so stuck in that like I can solve it, I can solve it, I can solve it, which is where my passion is. But one of the things that I've taken away over these last 8 or 9 years now is that one little 30-second exercise of a couple of deep breaths, close my eyes if I need to, and then just like embody the fact that I'm just here to be curious. And then through that lens, that persona that I'm wearing on right now is just like, I am curious. Like, I want to know so much more about everything that you're saying. I want to go 3 or 4 or 5 layers deeper in each one rather than latching on to your answer and being like, that's what our knock does, or our
Right.
project team takes care of it, or look at our fancy RMM tool, right? Like, you don't have to show up with a solution. You show up with questions to dig a little deeper and get a natural conversation coming out of the person that you're talking with.
And I think it's difficult because we do often feel like, oh, I have an answer for that. I should just give that out there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but we also, for me, I have to understand when I'm talking about things, when I'm posting about things, less is more. I don't, like you're saying, I don't leave space for anyone else. If I'm writing a post on the importance of being authentic in your marketing, if I'm just saying everything there rather than taking and asking, taking insight from the people in the community and asking what their thoughts are on it or how they go about it. Um, Less is more when you're doing any of your marketing, I
Yeah.
believe.
Yeah. I think when you said that, it made me think of this other saying that's been burned into the back of my skull, which is kind of the purpose of marketing is to demonstrate that you know how without necessarily divulging the know how, right? Like
Hmm.
the inverse side of that is like you position yourself as being, you can articulate their problem better than they can, but it doesn't mean you have to go the rest of the way through the conversation to like prove how smart you are about the thing.
Right.
Instead, you can stop kind of at the articulation of the problem, and then that invites someone in to have a totally different dynamic of the conversation. Right now,
Hmm.
now it's a partnership's probably an overplayed word, but like it's a collaborative conversation
Yeah.
versus like high sales resistance and totally uncomfortable for both people on each side.
And if you really like the way that I look at it with marketing, it's like my whole job or marketing's whole job is just to support sales.
Mm,
My job is to get someone to the point where they are ready to talk to sales and they're 50% of the way sold.
yeah.
Like I give them just enough information to go in and have discovery or to go in and get that final piece that's
Hmm.
there. Um, there's always, there's most of the time a lot of disconnect between sales and marketing and how they view that collaboration and that partnership. I see that fail a
Hmm.
lot because I don't think there's quite understanding when sales thinks marketing's putting all the information out there. We should have tons and tons and tons of really strong leads coming in
Hmm.
rather than a good handful of really qualified converting leads.
Yeah.
Um, when part of it's just to get the conversation going, get that interest peaked
Hmm.
and carry it through. And that's why sales and marketing needs to work together. So then I can go back to sales and figure out what was the problem
Yeah.
and go and use that again. I feel it's like a continuous loop. Um, but it goes back to that communication and the knowing and being curious. It has to work within a team as well.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up because I hadn't even thought of it. I'd forgotten this part of the history, but I was fortunate enough to experience being in a sales leader role. One, when marketing reported to the sales area of the org, at the other one where they were two disparate organizations. And actually, I think marketing even reported to finance and sales reported up to the CEO. It was like the way that that worked. And what I want to unpack there is really the important piece that you talked about, which is the congruency between those two functions in the business. And so, again, if we're talking to MSPs, which we are, and we're talking to those, maybe they do have one or more of those teams. Maybe they have nothing and they're thinking about, starting down that path. There's a handful of solutions that the market offers, right? You can build it in house, you can outsource it. Um, Maybe unpack for the audience some of your lessons learned of what you have seen work really well, and maybe what some of those early warning signs are towards the things that don't end up well, to get off the X and start the marketing process and sales process.
Yeah. Um, I've ran into a lot. I would say a majority of the time I run into issues with how sales and marketing works together. They just do not see each other as, a team or a collaboration, and usually because they're siloed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just a not knowing piece. Um, when I was at my MSP, every time we would do a morning sales huddle, there would be a sales team with 3 people, um, and then me running marketing, and we would do sales huddle so I could hear what was going on or what they're working on, who they're talking to. I can get an idea of what's changing,
Mm-hmm.
or what they're seeing or hearing. I think once the communication starts to go, or once there's frustration that isn't voiced. Like sometimes there's frustration from sales because leads or tons of leads aren't coming in. And that happens. It all
Mm-hmm.
depends on, what strategy you're using, what time of the year it is, what's going on. Once those conversations start happening, that's when things start falling apart. That's when you start hearing less about what's going on and where you can go with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like sometimes even marketing, or I know I can feel resentment towards sales if they're not viewing the leads or reading the data the way that I would expect them to. I think it's really important for
Mm-hmm.
teams, or at least leadership, once you get to a point of having sales, marketing,
Mm-hmm.
um, to be very clear on how data should be read or KPI should be read from bottom to top,
Yeah.
all the way through. It should be a very clear story, and it needs to be reflected on monthly, quarterly, everything, to see what's really working rather than how many leads came in, how many
Yeah.
closed last week.
Right.
It doesn't tell you anything.
Yeah. I'm glad that that's where you finished that concept too, because it was the first thing that was burning in my head as well. Is like, when we reverse engineered the conflicts that we had between sales and marketing at the time, the most interesting or revealing thing was that both departments were actually producing at a high level of efficacy towards the KPIs they had, but our KPIs were actually in direct conflict with one another. And so
Hmm.
that was the underlying thing that was creating the issue. And so there's kind of two elements to this. One is communication and expectations. But to set that aside for a second and really just focus back in on the KPIs portion, because I think this is really easy to get lost. What do you feel is the most important leading indicator that an MSP can track from a marketing standpoint? And what is the most critical lagging indicator that's sort of the other end of the book?
The biggest ones that I always set up is we have to know sourcing. Where are your leads coming from? Like it can be an overall, it can be general, if it's social, webinar, refer, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Really, really have your attribution. That's going to tell you so much just on that portion of loan, where you want to be focusing, which closed ones are bringing you your best ROI. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people get really stuck in the number of leads that just come in. Like, how many did we get off of the list? Are
Mm-hmm.
they good or not? It's like,
Yeah.
well, we don't know because it's a list. We have no background on that. I can tell you if it's going to be up to date, maybe, but I can't tell you if they're primed or ready or they have a need or it's a fit. I think that's a big one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Also, when people just look at engagement alone, everyone posts on social media and you can see engagement. You can see that people are clicking on things or commenting, but there's so many bots. There's so many background pieces that work inside of it where great, you have numbers, you can see what's performing, but you don't know if it's accurate. You don't know if it's really viable numbers to
Mm-hmm.
continue with the path you want to take.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important to take the marketing you had done the prior quarter, look at what leads came in from where, look at which is closed, and
Mm-hmm.
look at which are your top performers in that. And then go back to the beginning and find what's really working and reuse it. Or find the new problem that people are coming to you with and apply
Yeah.
it. I
Yeah.
think that's what there needs to be clarity on and there needs to be sync between, but it takes time
Mm-hmm.
and MSPs don't have time.
Yeah. Time, attention, space, like
Hmm.
all of the things for clarity, right? You need to be able to lock yourself in the conference room uninterrupted without the laptop for at least half the day, right? To do those
Yeah.
kinds of things. And whether it's real or imaginary, we don't allow that kind of space in our day to day existence. And as a result, then it's really easy to let ourselves off the hook too, because there's always something to do. So there's no like lack of effort or time commitment or work being done. It's just like the
Right.
difference between working on or in the business, and really forcing yourself into that room with
Yeah.
those questions, or even a facilitator. Like that's probably a better way of doing it. Force someone else to come in and pay them so that you're committed to actually sitting in that room and doing it. Right. Like you have
Hmm.
to kind of figure out your own vices and then reverse engineer all the excuses away. Is a little bit of lessons learned along the way too. From
Right. And it's hard because these things do take time to set up, but it takes a lot longer once you've grown more and you
mm-hmm.
have more clients and you have more data. Like if you do
Yeah.
it early on or right away, it's not as much as a headache to set up
Mm-hmm.
and to have a process built for.
Yeah. If I was an MSP, and again, I'm committed to my growth, Katie. I'm going to do something. It's a brand new year. It's 2025 now. I'm going to commit to bringing on marketing this year for my MSP. I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm not a creative, and I'm a tactician. Help me understand. Maybe it's the top one or two things I should be paying attention to during my due diligence process, regardless of if that means it's an agency or I'm hiring an in-house person. Like what are some of the uncommon characteristics I should be looking for as I look to bring in marketing to my org?
I always suggest that MSPs go and talk with their peer groups, their whoever they rely on, see what they're doing,
Mm-hmm.
see what people are using and what's working. Um, I typically advise going with an agency, depending on what exactly you need, because there's a lot of spend that goes into it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of things that may be there for MSPs or for companies that are really large and scaling really fast. And I think when you're an MSP that's starting out with marketing, there's so much you can do that's just already right in front of you. Hire someone that's part-time marketing that can start building up a social page, that can start pulling data
Mm-hmm.
from what are these key things we want to be talking about? What's our messaging? Where's our value prop? Like what do we want to put out there that's going to make people feel heard so that they could have these problems taken care of for them where they don't have to worry about it. Um, really start small with marketing. I don't think there ever needs to be a massive, massive push
Mm-hmm.
when you're just starting with marketing as an MSP.
Yeah. Are there, this is probably an unfair and universal question, so it's going to like flavor to taste based on whoever's applying it. But are there any specific efforts or initiatives or campaign types that you've seen as a good way for an MSP to sort of crawl, walk, run their way into building out a true, full marketing arm?
Really focus on your niche. If you have a niche, focus on it. If it's not even a niche, if it's just a geolocation, focus on it.
Mm-hmm.
Any way that you can build up like a Google business profile to start getting those backlinks, get on the maps. Um, that's really big. I see that missed out on a lot. Any sort of blogs you can just put that's like a knowledge dump from
Mm-hmm.
your brain, because we all have it. When we're trying to solve problems, we all have the problems in our head we want to solve
Yeah.
and we feel are important. Get it into some sort of blog or some sort of piece of content, anything. So you can just have backlinks and keywords and anything that goes back and forth. All your keywords are already there. You're already
Mm-hmm.
doing most of the work. So get it there and just have some sort of social media. For MSPs, Facebook is great, Reddit's great, and LinkedIn. Those are fantastic places and they're really simple and it doesn't take a ton of work just to get something set up or put out there.
Yeah. And have you seen, again, from someone who's doing nothing and they're starting down this path, one of the mistakes that I'd seen is like trying to boil the ocean, right? It's like I got to be in all of these places all the time, and so then I'm really shitty everywhere versus being like
Yeah.
really good and done one. Is that a false belief in your experience, or what would you say to that owner who is again committed to taking that first step as it relates to the online presence?
I would say figure out what you like or enjoy or can
Mm.
even tolerate doing. If there's something that's hitting your passion where you're like, okay, I do like talking online
Mm-hmm.
about my business, about what I'm doing, great. But if you don't want to write blogs, anything like that, I get it. There's
Yeah.
things that I don't like doing in marketing that I have a fantastic team for.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Figure out what you like and then delegate. I think delegating is really, really hard for MSPs.
Mm-hmm.
Really hard because they're problem solvers. So they want to take on everything and just handle it themselves and not
Yeah.
necessarily ask for help.
Mm-hmm.
That's me as well. But learning delegation early and understanding that there are people that can do 15
Mm-hmm.
hours a week and help you with this
Yeah.
is so, so impactful for what you can do with your marketing or where you can bring your business.
Yeah. And I think there's some characteristics to your point that we can pull out and learn from as MSPs, right? Like documentation is probably sore spot number 2, right behind real-time time entry, which is essentially the same thing. But the documentation piece, if we really unpack ways that you can accomplish that with such less friction in today's world than even a year ago, the place I wanted to go with that is it sounds like what I'm hearing you say is like systematize the things that need to happen in order to get to the outcome, right? And so even in a world where like I don't want to write blog blog posts, but I have no problem jumping in front of the camera and talking about either a topic or a thing that I'm really passionate about. And so breaking that down into a system, I
Mm-hmm.
can hit record in the privacy of my own studio. I can talk about the thing and do the thing. And then maybe part of what you're saying as well, to turn it into a system is like, well, there's the content and it's mine and I'm the original author and everything's good. Now I can break down the actual steps and process necessary to take that video piece of content into a written piece of content pushed to a platform where it needs to be hosted, and maybe even accompany the video asset that can get released as well. Are there any tips, tricks, hacks, systems, tools, anything along those lines that have been fundamental game changers for kind of that solopreneur type person to go from ideation, creation, execution that you can
Yeah.
gain?
So I keep a Notion for every little thing. Um, I think it's extremely important to document each process, figure out what's working or figure out what just doesn't fit in your process anymore as
Mm-hmm.
you evolve as well. Um, I use Scribe or
Oh yeah.
scribehow.com, I
Mm-hmm.
think it is, for everything. If I'm setting up marketing for an MSP for the first time, I document everything I'm doing and how, because I
Mm-hmm.
don't want them to have to keep me for the next 2 years. I want them to use the processes I'm setting up
Mm-hmm.
where it can be scalable and repeatable for the next 3, 6 months, and then have someone come in and join their team.
Yeah.
And they can follow that whole process I did. They could see everything and how it works,
Mm-hmm.
how I track the data, or how, you know, the owner is working through videos and blog posts and when he's posting or when they're putting new things out.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as it's documented and people can read it and they have some sort of idea or background,
Yeah.
um, it helps a lot. It took me a long time to understand, like, people can't read my mind.
Hmm.
So if there's something I like or something I expect or want done, I actually have to show someone how to do it. They can't just automatically know. Um,
Yeah.
that's another piece that I feel is really important to understand.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even if it's trial, error, anything, document it.
Mm-hmm.
People need to see how it works.
Yeah. Start to finish, right?
Yeah.
In that lens too. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Scribe because that was one of the ones I'd come across originally too. And the thing I loved the most was like I could just do the thing, and as I was doing it, it was
Yeah.
grabbing the documentation for me, right? And so to your point, like I'm so fast in my head ahead of where I actually am that like that's why the documentation would never get done, because I don't want to slow down and then
Right.
go do the documenting. So finding little things like that, or one of the others that again, I'm a video person, so like Loom is a good tool for me to use to just shoot a quick Loom video on screen, recording what I'm doing, and then I just talk about it, right? I'm doing this because of this reason, and here's what I go do. And when I'm done with that, I go over here and I do this. And then there's an asset that's recorded and can be reviewed without me if needed to kind of deconstruct A to Z. So
Yeah.
yeah, both of those tools are good ones for that particular use case, at least.
I agree. I see a lot of people using Loom in our space. I hate being on video. I don't ever do Looms. I would much rather read through a process.
Yeah.
Um, but I think it also depends on how you want your team to learn and how you want to handle that documentation after as well. Or
Mm-hmm.
if you're going to put it into something to read, to evolve. I think it
Yeah.
all comes back. But both are great solutions, and definitely just keeping something that tracks it with
Mm-hmm.
dates and reviewing it,
Yeah.
because you're going to evolve, your company's going to evolve, and your marketing has to evolve with it as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I want to pull back kind of to a bit of where we started in the conversation, just in case anyone's feeling too overwhelmed by what they need to go do, right? As it relates again to just getting off the X, as I like to say. Um, so let's eliminate as many excuses as we can. We're going to be talking to that MSP owner or the leader of the department if you're large enough. We're going to talk to them specifically about the most actionable thing they can do right now with their current clients that actually contains the motions of marketing that we're talking about, so that they can begin to create their very first process inside the marketing bucket, what exercise would you walk that MSP owner through as it relates to their current clients and going out and manufacturing the right conversation to have with them that they would still get the dopamine hit from at the end of the day of maybe it's pricing them right, maybe it's getting them the right stack, right? Because they sold them
Right.
7 years ago and things have changed. Like what's a really rudimentary process you could lay out for that owner to be able to take yet this afternoon?
Review your ICP. Go through it. Take
Mm,
current clients, put them in there, and just review it. Find what's similar, put it in an Excel, and it'll do it for you pretty much. But
yeah.
I think sometimes it gets difficult because we can get information overload. We want to
Mhm.
know everything, or I want to know every single piece, anything I might miss, but figure out what are the key things that are important. What's the problem you're solving? Where did they come from? Or how did they find you?
Mhm.
And then how do you want to speak to them? Like, what way works for you? Or do you feel powerful enough to speak to prospects or clients? Just review the ICP. That tells you so much information about your business and
Mhm.
about what you've been doing and who's been coming in, that I think just having that information in front of you and cleaned up and reviewed is so, so powerful. You can create an entire quarter's worth of marketing around that. Definitely
Mhm.
social media, and just figure out how you want to speak to that. How do you like making short videos? Do you like talking about
Mhm.
these problems that your company solves? Do you like writing about it? Like, how do you want to get across to people? I very much like being in person. So I
Right.
go to all the shows and all the conferences and have the in-person conversations. And I find that's what works for me. And I'm okay with that.
Mhm.
I think it's really doing a little bit of self-reflection, but getting the ICP in order and
Yeah.
making sure it's updated.
Yeah. I love that. The power inside an ICP is that then you know exactly who you're talking to, right? And when you're talking to one person, you have a very different conversation than when you're talking to a room of people, right? Whether you consciously aware of it or it's just subconsciously
Right.
happening. And one trick that I had to use early on, because I used to be more scarcity mindseted when I was building out this stuff as a marketer. Like I don't want to be just one thing to one person because then I'm nothing to no one and I'm going to miss all this opportunity. And that was like mistake number one because it really just watered down the quality of all my communication when I wasn't talking specifically to the office manager of an orthopedic clinic that had, 3 practitioners and 17 staff and 2 locations. And like the fallacy in not talking specifically to that office manager was like I didn't ever hit any of the problems which you mentioned earlier because not everyone's problems are universal. And
Right.
orthopedic clinics have very specific problems different than dental offices as an example, right? And so the litmus test for the MSP owner that's out there like, hey, that actually was a light bulb moment was I sat and I thought when I was on the support desk, right? And I saw caller ID pop up for that phone call, like which clients could I like race in front of all of the other technicians to answer the call for compared to like which one did I run away from having to answer because you didn't want to
Yeah.
talk to that person for any given reason. And I let that be like my first step in defining ICP. It's like, well, what is it about the person that we're fighting to talk to and why? Is it just personality? Or are we like that with everyone in the role across all of our clients that happens to be like that too? Right. And we started using that kind of deductive reasoning to figure out, well, I really enjoy talking to office managers, forget the title, right? But like of construction companies because they're no bullshit, black and white, direct, you know where you stand. They also are action takers and they get things done and they know the intricacies of every interpersonal relationship inside their entire org. So they're just really
Right.
easy to work with. Um, I guess the question in there, do you have any hacks or litmus tests that you've used similar to that caller ID gut instinct component to again like get off the X of I don't know where to begin with my ICP because that's a really challenging conversation sometimes even
Hmm.
internally for those MSP owners that can move them towards having an ICP.
I am so one of those people that's just like, you just do it. Like,
Yeah.
if you don't, it's not going to happen. There's going to be zero change. You're going to be right where you're at. Even
Mm-hmm.
just start doing it. Pull your client information into an Excel, and that's one step.
Yeah.
Like, get there.
Mm-hmm.
Figure out what information is important. That's a second step. Do that. Wait on it. Think about it if you need to. Just taking any step towards doing something
Mm-hmm.
is really impactful, and it makes it a little less scary.
Yeah.
But if you want to grow, if you want to expand, and if you want to help more people, there are steps you have to take. And you can't really be scared about it, because either way, it's going to happen. If you're not doing it,
Mm.
another MSP is going to.
Yeah. That's such a good point. And a phenomenal segue to something that I completely missed when I opened the show. And that is I broke protocol. So on the show, one of the things that we do, and you're going to get the opportunity to do it to somebody else, is we, from our former guest, we take one question that they leave behind for the next guest. And then we normally open the show that way. And so the guest that was on previously was Tim Kunkel, the CEO of the 20. And the reason it's a segue is basically his question, because it's where this whole thing wraps up to. You know, you're talking about just do it, just take action, just do the thing. We've talked about a lot of other opportunities here that would really get someone off the X and start. And Tim Kunkel's question, and he didn't know who the guest would be, but his question was, what would happen if people were actually accountable?
A lot. A lot. Accountability is huge for me. I hold every one of my clients, anyone I advise for, I hold them accountable, and I expect them to hold me accountable in
Yeah.
every way. Um,
Yeah.
I feel like, or personally believe, that the only way you can really grow and learn and really evolve is by having a community that's going to hold you accountable, or telling you, like, that worked or that didn't work, or let's look at it a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when you don't have accountability, when you're doing it on your own, and you don't have, you know, in a company, any sort of communication, you get lost and you don't know what your goals actually are. What are you working towards?
Mm-hmm.
There's no accountability there. Then you're just there producing things, and with no end. And
Yeah.
that's a huge waste of time and money.
Right. I
Yeah.
totally agree. In my experience inside the MSP world too, there's this invincibility cloak oftentimes that gets to be worn at the top, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
not in every case, but in a lot of cases, most MSPs began, they were born out of the idea and the reality that it was a really smart technical person who was good enough with people and had just enough of an edge of defying authority that they didn't like working for someone else, so they started their own thing. And then they turn around years later and they have a handful of employees or more, and they're about $1 million in revenue or more. And but there's like, they didn't set out to be the world's greatest business owner or the best entrepreneur or anything like that. They just wanted to be a great tech with a little less authority in their lives, right? And so to bring that back to the accountability piece, right? Accountability was like the thing that just didn't quite exist as it should or it could in those organizations, especially when we're talking sales and marketing, because again, there's so much reactive work that happens
Yeah.
that that's like proof, meaning like, well, I didn't get to it because I had to do this exchange migration, or because this client blew up, or there was a ransom event. Like, there's so many tangible and practical pieces of evidence that can be pointed to on the operations side of the house, that's why I didn't hit my number. It's why I didn't do my cold calls. It's why I didn't send my emails. It's why I didn't push the email campaign. Are there any lessons that you've learned outside of getting an outside consultant like yourself to hold you accountable? Like, is there any like step one process that you've seen work really well for MSP owners specifically to hold themselves and their organization accountable?
I believe it's really important to find someone that you can just communicate with, or have like an open, maybe vulnerable conversations with about what you're doing or what you're working on. Everyone
Mhm.
kind of needs a sounding board. Otherwise, you're just in your head and you have no real bias.
Yeah.
Um, I believe finding anyone that you trust, that you can feel like you can be more vulnerable with, that understands a bit of what you're doing, but may have an outside view,
Mhm.
is really powerful. But also understanding that your teams need to have accountability. They need to have accountability not only with you as a leader, but with each other. For
Yeah.
marketing and sales, I think they massively need to hold each other accountable, um, because that's like the main team that's going to bring in this profit so people can grow, so ops can build more. Um, but I also think that there needs to be open conversations with leadership, sales, marketing, ops, all of it as well,
Mhm.
holding each other accountable and really understanding what does that accountability look like and what does it mean? Because I think
Yeah.
it looks and means different things to everyone, just like success looks different to everyone as well.
Yeah. That's a good answer, and an unintentional segue as well to, if somebody has had several light bulb moments from you today in this conversation, where do they get more of Katie, and how would they reach out to you if they
Yeah,
wanted to?
absolutely. So they can go to my website, luminarycreative.co, or find me on LinkedIn, message me there. That's one of the best ways. I'm always on there. And I'll leave my email and everything as well.
Yeah, awesome. So I can't let you off the hook without setting up the next guest for the uncomfortable moment of the suspense of a question that they didn't know was coming. So if you could ask the next guest any one question to extract a piece of knowledge or experience out of their journey helpful for MSPs, what would that question be?
What is one misconception you had about this channel that you learned now was not true? I
Mm,
think there's a lot of misconceptions out there.
yeah, that's a good question. Something that I would love to dig further into, even on in this conversation, but we can't. So, thank you again, Katie, for being here today. Hopefully, you all have taken away a handful, I mean, pages full of nuggets. I could show you my notes from the conversation. The most important piece of advice that I believe, speaking for her, Katie would tell you is that don't overwhelm yourself with the thinking work. Just simply get it all out on paper first, or in a Notion first, and then
Mhm.
start with the top and just start, right? Just execute, pick one thing, do it well, get it moving, and you'll find that momentum will start to stack in those footsteps along the way. So thank you for
Absolutely.
tuning in, and thank you again, Katie, for being here, and we will see everybody next time on MSP Insider.